Morning, gentlemen. It's Jim Bounds at Motorhome Rehab Ranch here in beautiful Utah next to the Jordan River here, RV park. We've been here a little bit of time with Bonneville Garage, Bonneville High School, working on their project of Road Force 1. Getting ready to head home. Thank you, AYL, for sponsoring us. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about oil. Now, I've talked about oil before, and oil is kind of one of those things people talk about, like what kind of tires they like, or what kind of they drink Coke or Pepsi or things like that, and that's all fine. But I just want to talk about something else. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is I've answered a lot of questions while I've been out here about this. Okay, so here's your front. Here's where your oil dipstick is. And if you've never checked the oil in one of these things, the one thing is be sure you got a rag, because that dipstick is really long and it goes right past the exhaust manifold and it gets really hot. So a couple of things. That dipstick tube is broken in two pieces. There's a lower dipstick tube and there's an upper, and there's a compression fitting in between the two. You may want to be sure that that compression fitting is tight, because if the tube moves out, you'll get a wrong reading. Okay. Also, the lower dipstick tube has a shoulder on it, and it's pressed into the block. It gets loose. So you pull up on the dipstick and the dipstick tube comes out, or comes loose, or it rusts right where it goes into the block, and you pull the dipstick out and it won't go back in. So my suggestion is to take a look at your dipstick and your dipstick tube and be sure it's not rotted off. Now, if the lower dipstick tube is rotted off, it broke loose, say, oh no, what am I going to do? It's stuck down in the block. No problem. Pull off the dipstick. Now you got that piece of tube that's rusted off in there. Take a coat hanger and stick it down the hole. Take the oil drain plug off, drain the oil out, and stick that coat hanger down there and find the drain hole. Right? Okay. Find the drain hole and let the coat hanger go out the drain hole. Then take a 3/8 inch steel tube, that's the size of the dipstick tube, and put it over the coat hanger and pound what's left of that old dipstick tube down into the block. Kind of scary, huh? But what it's going to do, it's going to follow the coat hanger, and it's going to come out the oil drain. Okay? You say, now what am I going to do? Well, in the old days, we used to take a piece of steel 3/8 inch tube, weld or tack weld a ferrule to it at exactly the length of the old one. I think it's 14.5 or something. You can call me or just look at the old one. Weld a ferrule on there for the shoulder, and put the new one in there and bend it up. Make sure it's the same length, because if it's a different length, you'll get a different reading on your dipstick. Okay. So come up, go to the compression fitting, and connect the upper tube to the lower tube. And then calibrate your dipstick. And if you've never done this, you may want to make sure that you're putting the right amount of oil in it. Empty the oil. Okay. Put 5 quarts. Why 5? Well, if you're going to do an oil change, it's supposed to be 6 quarts and a filter. Well, there's about a quart or so in the filter and the tubes and all this, the cooler tubes and all that. Put 5 quarts in there and check your dipstick. Should be at full. Fire the engine up, let it go through. Should be a quart low. If it is, well, then you're right on the money. Now, when you go to pull the dipstick out, hold the tube, because if it is loose down there, it will pull out and you'll get a different reading. Good morning. Say I'm in an RV park. People are walking in the morning. So You hold the dipstick tube with your right hand and pull the dipstick out. Remember, have a rag on here, because if you're on the road and you're going to check your dipstick, that dipstick is hot. Now, there are two dipsticks. I have a flat dipstick. The later model, this is a 73. The later models had a wire dipstick, and the wire dipstick goes in a lot easier. Okay, this dipstick, as you go in, don't just push it like this. See how it binds up? Push it down here, because it's got to go past. Remember, I told you there's a compression fitting, so it's two. So as it goes in, it's going to hit right there. It's going to hit where that compression fitting is. You got to push past it, right? So we pull it out, hold it like this, and read. Mine says it's an ad. Now, there's a wives' tale. Now, I used to think it was a little crazy. It says that if you run it a quart low, it won't use as much oil, because normally you're going to use a quart of oil every 800 to 1,000 miles. Okay, and that pretty much holds true. If you're using more oil than that, you may want to see you may have a problem, or could have a leak or something like that. 800 to 1,000 miles is a good gauge. Well, this wives' tale of running a quart low and you won't use it anymore, I thought it was silly. Well, one year I was going to the international rally in Marion, North Carolina. And I left Orlando. I got somewhere in Georgia, middle of the night. Some dude dropped in, and the oil that they had there was terrible oil. I want to use the right kind of oil. And I was a quart low. I said, well, let's try. Let's see what happens. So I kept checking the oil every time I stopped and got gas. Normally you want to check your oil every other time that you stop. You really do. But I checked it every time I stopped. And you know, I didn't use any more oil. I went all the way to Marion, North Carolina, and all the way home, and it stayed on the ad. Now, I talked to my engine builder, Drew, about that. He was appalled. He said, no, make sure you put 6 quarts in there and keep it full, blah, blah, blah. Well, I got to tell you, I was just below the ad mark, and I filled this thing up in Orlando, and I've driven this thing over 2,000 miles, and I haven't put any oil in it, and I have just below the ad. Okay, now my engine has over 150,000 miles on it, and I've told you before that my timing chain is really loose. So this is an old motor. Okay, it's running really good. It's not using any oil. It's running pretty good other than the timing chain. And if you ask, well, how do I know the timing chain is loose? Well, if you have a vacuum gauge, you should be able to get about 10 inches of vacuum at 60 miles an hour. Okay, and you're driving along, and I'm watching the vacuum gauge. I'm at 60, and I just barely touch the gas, and it just drops. The vacuum really drops. Every time I go up a hill, the vacuum really drops down below 6 inches. That's saying that the timing chain is loose, because when you're under load, a loose timing chain will retard your engine, so it'll feel like it's really sluggish and it needs more vacuum to keep going. When you get to the top and the motor starts to freewheel, it's not pulling as hard, the timing chain will advance your timing, and man, that thing will act like a rocket going down the hill, and you'll have all kinds of vacuum. You'll decelerate, you'll have 20 inches of vacuum or so. That is the timing chain going back and forth, back and forth. Coming up here, JG did pretty good, and I've noticed though that going up the hills and things, I'm really losing vacuum, so I know the timing chain is loose. And when I started this, I was going to change the timing chain when I got up here. To be honest with you though, as in most projects, projects are bigger than anybody had ever thought. And this project is very ambitious. at Bonneville Garage. We put in a fuel tank. We dropped the motor, put the motor back in, transmission and differential too, changed the differential, putting in Phytech. We're doing the aluminum radiator. So there's a lot of projects, a lot of labor there. And to be honest with you, there's just not enough time for the gearheads, the kids, the students at Bonneville High School, and me, and even Mark and everybody else that's here to do my timing chain. So I'm going to just take it easy and go on home with it. And as long as you take it easy going up the hills, don't hammer it, I can get back. Now, we did a lot of work on my project, on my coach, while we were up here. We, as you know, my fuel tanks were nasty. We had a cleanable fuel filter, 100 micron fuel filter, and we had to stop every 40 miles and change the fuel and clean the fuel filter, which told us that my fuel tanks were full of rust. And I dropped the tanks, and Chad was good enough to take one tank and get it lined for me. So I'm going to head home with 25 gallons. It's going to be less like a yo-yo because I had to stop every 40 miles. I'm going to have to stop about every 120, 150 miles to put fuel in it because I'm only going to have 25 gallons on board. But that's okay. Why? Because it's clean fuel. The fuel injection needs clean fuel, and we'll get back. Okay. Now on the oil, I'm going to go ahead and put a cord in it, and head back and see what happens. And I'll report on that when I get home. And so while we're talking about oil, what kind of oil? Well, I've talked about this before, but this engine is a great American redneck big block. Okay, it was designed when men were men and oil was oil. I guess I say it that way. And as I started this video, you know, people have all their own ideas about oil and AMSOIL and synthetic and non-synthetic and all this kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of good oil and no bad oil other than recycled, stuff. But I mean, technology today, the oils are very good, okay? But oils are for different applications. In this application, with this old Belch fire motor, I like to use single viscosity oil. You say, why? Well, engines, especially big blocks, as they heat up, they swell. And as oil heats up, it thins out. Well, it seems like the engineers that designed this engine designed it where as the engine swelled up and the oil thinned out, that it hit that one point right in the middle that everything works well. Right? Now, oils today, multi-viscosity oils, try to keep the viscosity whether they're cool, cold, or hot. Okay, and that's a pretty good idea. But I like this idea that as the oil thins out and the engine swells up, that the viscosity hits right in the middle. Right. So in the summer, I use straight 30 weight. In the winter, I'm sorry, backwards. In the summer, because of heat, I use straight 40 weight oil. And in the winter, if you use 40 weight, it'd be molasses, as you guys up north would know. I use 30 weight, straight 30 weight oil. Now, the oil that you use needs to have ZDDP. ZDDP. Look it up when you finish this on Google. It'll scare you. ZDDP is an additive that does not lose its lubricity as it gets hot. And in the 30s, engineers found that you need to have 1,500 parts per million of ZDDP in your oil for it to have the proper lubricity so the engine doesn't eat itself. Right? The API, American Petroleum Institute, has 600 parts per million of ZDDP in their oil. That's why you want to use a high mileage oil or an off-road oil or something. Look at the oil and see that it has 1,500 parts per million of ZDP. We use Valvoline VR1. Not that it's the only oil, okay? But this oil has 1,500 parts per million of ZDP plus it has the proper detergents for gasoline. Now, Rotella and Dello is oils or diesel oils, and they have a lot of lubricity. They're very slick too, but they have detergents for diesel, and diesel uses different detergent because it's a different kind of soot that gets into the oil. It does work, and I know a lot of people use it and swear by it, and that's wonderful. I'm not telling them you're wrong. It's just that when you look into it a little bit, you want to use an oil that's designed for gas. Now, you don't want to use a racing oil because it has less detergent, so it doesn't foam up quite as much. So you're running fast, high RPMs, and all that kind of stuff, and heat. So I would not use a pure racing oil. You'd have to change it too often. You want to use an oil that has detergents in it because that keeps the engine clean. You look at an oil, changing the oil, more than just putting new oil in, but it also takes all the impurities, all the soot, all the junk that the engine created and threw into the oil. It takes that out. And if you're running a carburetor, you really need to change your oil every 1,000, 1,500 miles because the the carburetor doesn't atomize the fuel properly, and it puts gas into the oil, thins the oil out, and that's a problem for us. Somebody says, well, I use a carburetor. Maybe someday I'll get the fuel injection. Look, if you like a carburetor, that's cool. I like quadrajet carburetors. I'm almost as smart as one of those. I can figure out what to do with it. And if you want to keep your carburetor, it's okay with me. It's not a negative thing. But you need to change your oil more often. That's the only thing. That's really the only reason to go to fuel injection right now, because your oil gets dirtier. Okay? So don't start saving money and say, I have to have fuel injection. I have to have fuel injection. Most of our GMCs don't have fuel injection. And I'm not going to knock that at all. But just change your oil more often. All right? So oil, real important thing, especially in an old belch fire machine like this. Be sure that you check your oil at least every other tank full of fuel, just to be sure you see how it's using, you see the use. Now, coming up here, I had an oil leak. I even had an oil leak on the intake manifold. I still didn't use enough oil. I'm a 1 quart low, which that's okay with me, right? So I hope this helps you a little bit. I know that you'll hear all kinds of things, all sorts of stuff that people talk about oil, and I'm not knocking synthetic oil at all, because new technology comes up with new things. I'm not knocking viscosity oil, multi-viscosity oils, but I just feel this is what I've done. This is what we've recommended over the years, and it seems like it works. It works pretty well for us. Well, look, I appreciate your time. I hope this was valuable to you. You could learn a few things. If you have any questions or you have something to add, please give me a call. You have my ranch hands, you have my phone number, and if you do appreciate this and want to do more, support Motorhome Rehab Ranch and become a ranch hand. You don't have to. I want this to be an open source database for everybody that has GMCs. I want to promote the GMC motorhome. I want the next generation of folks are really interested in them, and I'm interested in them too. All right. Well, look, we'll have more videos. I'm going to be off the road pretty soon. I tell you, it's really difficult to do videos when you're out on the road and you're the only person here doing it. And when I get back, I've got an editor, somebody that can actually help me push that button and make it a little bit more professional. And but until then, thanks for watching. I hope this is helpful, and we'll see you next time.